blown away.
back to you. Back to you. What's going on? How can we help you?
Well, yeah, I was listening to the current administration's comments on NATO contributions. I live in Spain, and I've just looked us up. And in terms of contributions, we're under Slovakia. We're kind of bottom of the list, 1.2% of GDP, I think. So the current administration, or maybe successive administrations, are looking to increase it to 5%, which seems like a very grand figure. But is this like a general? Because a lot of comments from the US in general, not necessarily this administration, seem to be suggesting that the US is the guardian of the world, which it is.
That's what the United States would like the world to believe, I think. I think in the past 20-odd, 30-odd years of foreign policy, we've tried to establish ourselves as the world police. They literally made fun of that in a movie called America World Police. But yeah, I think as part of our global supremacy in establishing military bases everywhere on Earth, it also means funding to large national defense pacts, which is why it becomes a hot button issue when certain people are like, hey, you guys aren't contributing enough. The point of it is the part that you're contributing means you're a larger stakeholder in an agreement, which means you get to have more say in what happens. So there's benefits to sometimes being the person that spends more. But, again, we're getting into geopolitics here. Maybe Ben, who has actually formally studied philosophy, knows more about the philosophy of, and ethics of nation states and can comment more thoroughly than I can. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, there's a certainly like the U.S. foreign policy has been pretty back and forth and topsy-turvy and all over the place over the last 16 years or more, especially when it comes to those alliance systems, and with our current administration having a history of calling for more members of NATO to invest more in it. Americans, it's not really clear whether they also are advocating to withdraw how much the U.S. is contributing, but it's whether or not NATO has been destabilizing or a stabilizing force can be debated, but certainly the U.S. foreign policy has not been really consistent when it comes to addressing things with our allies.
Yeah, it's pretty much whoever is elected that 4 years kind of just makes some shit up, and we just keep repeating that every 4 years or so. But anyway,
there is a long history of presidents trying to maintain foreign policies of the previous administration, so there is that consistency, because if you want to have alliances, especially with countries that don't have the same sort of electoral system that we do, they rely on consistency. And so that's why actual treaties and things like that they're sought and metered out by the executive branch, but then they're supposed to be voted on by Congress. And those are supposed to be like a consistent thing regardless of what administration comes and goes. We've deviated from that a fair bit since kind of the start of the war on terror, the so-called war on terror. And previous before that with Ronald Reagan was fairly disruptive to that idea also.
Yeah, there's a lot we could talk about with your military experience, I feel like. But anyway, we're talking about Clement. You obviously have something you want to say.
Well, I mean, I get the the guard dog of the world kind of thing. I mean, I'm not actually from Spain. I live here, but as you might have guessed, I'm from the UK.
Don't say. You're telling me you're not a native Spaniard, Clement, because you could have fooled me.
Bueno, si quieres hablar español, vamos.
There's
but,
that was quite an inquisition you did there with your Spanish, and nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Hey.
Oh, there we go.
very,
That's a
very funny. Yes.
by them. Okay, go ahead.
Cross borders joke. Nice. Yeah, but so in the past, the UK before, I don't know, Yalta or something like that, did the job poorly that the US does now, as in being the bookkeeper and the keeper of the world, that kind of thing. And I mean, I have nothing to do with the UK anymore. As I say, I live in Spain. But the current administration, there was a comment that Spain was a member of the BRICS, which is kind of half right. We're not a member of the BRICS, we're a member of the PIGS, which is Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. So we're considered to be the poor man of Europe.
Now, hold on, Clement. You're telling me the president of the United States wasn't made a mistake about another country's involvement in a national defense fund? That's wow. I would never have guessed that.
Well, and BRICS is a national defense. It's an economic agreement like NATO.
Oh, yes, economic agreement. You're right. It's not. But anyway, yeah, I'm not surprised that the current administration maybe isn't the best at getting facts right. So, no shocker there to me, Clement.
Well, he got it half right. He just got the acronym wrong.
Yes.
And I was wondering, because, well, in Spain, to be honest, it's a lovely place to live, which is why I live here, not in the UK. I mean, it's sunny and, there are all sorts of lovely social benefits. And I was just wondering, I think from what the current administration was saying that temporarily we've got some kind of pass, because he seemed to suggest that because we're a member of the BRICS, or rather the PIGS, that we weren't a priority for increasing NATO expenditure. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what it seemed to be. He said to the person who was interviewing him, you know what I mean, or something like that. But to be honest, in Europe, it's a very nice way of life. I mean, I'm very comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And if our contributions have to go up from 1.2%, which I looked up just earlier, to 5% or approaching that, whether this, I mean, I suppose it would have an impact on taxes and things like that, and Social Security, which we all love. We like our siestas and things like that. Whether
I gotta interrupt you, because you're talking to two guys on a live show right now with tinfoil hats on their head. And I don't know what you want to get out of us, but I don't know what more I can comment on. How many more percentage points should one country contribute to economic funds and stuff? Are we getting somewhere with this? Because you've lost me on the plot here.
Yeah. My point is this a general view in the US that other members of NATO should increase their contribution to NATO at the expense of citizens or residents like me?
I will tell you
in
something that's
terms of,
interesting about Americans is that we are so privileged that we don't even know, the average American doesn't know how many countries we've bombed. Okay. Like, or don't even know what engagements we're in. American foreign policy, the average person's opinion on American foreign policy has, and this has been demonstrated through past election cycles, has had the pretty much one of the least impacts on what somebody's going to vote for in any given election. Now, there's some debate a little bit about that, particularly with Gaza and stuff, saying maybe there's more influence than what people have said. But in general, like foreign policy in Americans, they don't really have a lot of hot takes. All right. And if they do have takes, it's usually bad ones. There's a lot of people talking about divestment from Ukraine and stuff, think, oh, it's not our war and stuff, but everybody's super pro-Israel here, right? So, you've got your like real hawks on the situation, I suppose, that are really interested in that kind of stuff. But like average man on the street, I don't even know if they have a take. I don't think the average person on the street in America could point out where Israel even is on a map, let alone, what they think we should be doing about it. But, I may be more critical.
well,
Ben might have a different opinion.
That's kind of my point. Sorry to interrupt. I don't think you are privileged. I think that, I think that living in Spain, that I'm privileged.
Yes.
I wonder whether
there's a difference between being privileged and thinking you're privileged.
Yes.
The average American is fully convinced that we're privileged. They wouldn't describe it that way, but they're fully convinced that we are the top of the world in everything. As such, like there's a little bit of evidence that what's happened in Israel affected this last election, but for the most part, the average American has no idea what's going on. 16 years ago, a politician would have gotten into trouble for defaming or implying that our NATO allies were not contributing enough. Now it's just common parlance for them to just say it and get away with it. The average person has no idea how much any given member of NATO is donating, contributing, what that even means. Like, is the contribution in dollars or is it in bullets? Most Americans have no idea. And the confusion now, and it's weird that the comments about Spain in particular, he was, if I understand correctly, the president was referring to BRICS, which is an attempt to offset the Schengen area in Europe and then the NAFTA in North America.
The Schengen area.
Schengen area, yes. I apologize if I misspoke.
Yeah.
But then usually it's described BRICS and then has an S on the end, and then he just assumed that it was Spain when it's not. Our politicians, in particular their current administration, are not well informed or well thought through on stuff, and that comes out often in the way they talk about stuff.
Sure. The Israel question is all foreign policy in Europe, as far as I'm aware, maybe not in Kosovo, is pro-Israeli. I mean, Israel was invented by the Americans and the British. Balfour Declaration, I think it was. And so our policies, generally speaking, are aligned to the US, which is one of the reasons why we're members of NATO. But it sort of seems that, in the US, the welfare state doesn't seem, from watching programs like Wonderful Truth Wanted, isn't quite as developed.
No,
it's not.
But listen,
it's mostly non-existent.
I was wondering whether exactly. So I was wondering in Europe, you see, especially in Spain, where our contribution to NATO 1.2%, I believe currently, that it was like some kind of attack on the welfare state, whether free healthcare and
yes. The reason why Americans don't have free healthcare is because we put all our money into making sure we can bomb the shit out of anybody that opposes us. Like, and here's what I mean when I talk about privilege here. Okay. You point out the fact that America isn't as developed as Europe in terms of social safety nets, things like that, right? I 100% agree with you. But we are privileged in other ways. And let me tell you why. You live in a country right now that has had dictatorships, that has had people who have absolutely changed.
Only one.
Yeah, sorry. I was sorry. I'm speaking out of turn. I was thinking of Italy, and you're in Spain. I don't know why I thought you were in Italy for a second, but that was me misspeaking. Point is, you're still in Europe, and Europe has had a lot of conflict with other nations living right next to each other, doing all sorts of shit within the last 100 years. Okay, United States. Last time we had anybody even try to come on to us was Pearl Harbor. And that didn't really work out, right? Like Americans have not had to grow up and live and seen the ravages of war in their homeland, right? Especially not my generation, certainly, right? We just haven't seen it. We haven't had to deal with that kind of conflict. So we haven't. Most Americans aren't really socially conscious about the kinds of stuff that goes on with their military, right? They just kind of hope that they're doing the right thing and bombing the right people, and that's really it. Like it is a kind of privilege. It's a privilege of ignorance. But it's a kind of privilege that allows people to live in comfort and safety and not really care about what's going on in Yemen or anywhere else. So, I'm
sorry to interrupt, but you guys in the U.S. think that this situation is a privilege.
Clement, I need you to understand what I'm saying here, right? I'm not saying it's a good thing. You understand? I'm not saying it's what the right things it should be. I'm saying that's the way it is. Being privileged also means being ignorant sometimes of world events because you don't have to suffer like other people do. That's the difference, right? So I don't mean it in the sense of, oh, we're so great and mighty and this is awesome and everybody should live their life like that way. I'm saying we haven't had the kind of hardships that other places have had. So we don't have those kinds of worries. Germany is like really famous for its like anti-Nazi laws because they know what happens when Nazism takes over a country, right? We don't have those kinds of protections here, which might be part of the reason why we're seeing what we're seeing today, right? So, it's just the reality that we live in. That's all I'm saying on that, Clement.
Well, I mean, okay, we had Franco in Spain. Until what was it, 75 or something? And in the UK, there was Cromwell until I think it was 1649. But in general, there hasn't been any sort of major conflict apart from maybe Kosovo or something like that ever. The Second World War.
Yes, but Europe and the individual countries that make it are much, much smaller and have much more reliance on other nations for military endeavors than the United States does. That's a huge, huge difference. United States could absolutely go against, could fight against all of Europe right now and could absolutely still win. Like that's a real analysis that people have done and have said that, yeah, the US wins like pretty much every time. So like, it's a difference in the understanding of culture, I think, right? Like we just
look the number of tanks that Europe has in total. The Clercs in France and the what they call the Centurions or something in the UK and other ones. These are high-grade weapons and.
Okay, I think we're losing the plot here, Clement. I want to go back for a second because we're also running out of time here. Okay, here is the point. Americans have had it good for a really long time, right? In terms of their stability in international conflicts, right? Average American doesn't have to worry about, military uprising. We don't have to worry about invasions. We don't, and so like that can make us kind of ignorant and kind of lazy in our thinking of how we should treat other people. That's all I'm saying with that, man. I'm not trying to start a fight about whether I think America is better than Europe. Okay, that's not what's happening here. So please understand. I'm trying to make a very, I guess, subtle point.
Not. But my point was that as far as I can say, I've been to the States a couple of times. Mind you, it was a few years ago. But it seems to me that from what I've been listening to, watching your shows and so on, that the standard of living in the States is actually not that great.
Okay, we've already talked about this.
Agree.
I feel like we're going in circles. Clement, I'm going to let you go. I appreciate you calling into the show, and I hope you've heard our point here. But yes, we agree. The average social safety net of the average American is not good.